Our next session is a leadership discussion on the topic, how do we sustain trust in technology? The pandemic has created new avenues and the world has become more virtual than ever. With the paradigm shift in application-based technology offerings and the humongous amount of data that's generated, it's become crucial for business leaders to revamp their strategies to win back trust. This session will focus on the way ahead in rebuilding trust in the virtual era. To tell us more, I would like to introduce the moderator for this panel, Rekha M. Menon, Chairperson Accenture in India and Vice-Chairperson NASSCOM, to set the context and introduce the panel. Rekha is a leading industry voice on advanced technology-led innovation and socio-economic progress. Rekha is the Vice Chairman of NASSCOM and a member of the National Council of CII, co-chair of CII's Indian Women Network and USIBC's Indian Advisory Council. She's also on the board of governors of her alma mater, the Axilor School of Business, and two not-for-profits, Pratham Books and Akshara Foundation. Rekha, it's a pleasure to invite you on stage. It's all yours. Over to you.
Thank you, Shreya. So we're here to talk about how to sustain trust in technology. And we've seen the pandemic, which has disrupted all our lives, but it's also given us an opportunity to really reimagine and reinvent, both at the individual, at the societal, at the industry level, at the government level. And technology really has become the lifeline across all these segments and will lie at the heart of this change. In fact, at Accenture, we believe that technology plus human ingenuity are the key to solving some of the world's biggest challenges. And as we work through those challenges, we have to be careful how technology is used, because the pace and intensity of tech-led innovation as it increases is very easy to overlook the potential costs to humans in this tech-enabled progress. And already we have questions on whether or how technology can be the right partners for humans to reach their full potential. And as an industry, as we help our businesses and governments and societies to reimagine their future using technology, we also have to pay very careful attention to building trust in technology, because trust is the ultimate currency of the digital age. And without it, we as enterprises and individuals can't thrive. So my co-panelists and I are here to discuss what's crucial to sustain trust in technology. And I believe that there are three dimensions. One, picking the right priorities, because at the broad level, building trust starts with the right intentions. And for the technology industry, it really boils down to where and how do we direct our power and influence. We need purposeful innovation, and trust has to become the guiding light for that. And we also need to shift our focus from shareholder value creation to stakeholder value creation. The second is really responsible execution, because any intention is as good as its execution. And we know that the rapid growth of technology, sometimes the best laid plans are going to go awry. And therefore, we have to figure out whether data collection, privacy, responsible development, are there frameworks and guardrails that keep us true to our purpose. And the third one is really transparency and accountability, because as an industry, it's our responsibility to consider all possibilities and the consequences as we drive the appropriate use of technology. And we need the right regulation and governance processes to ensure that we are transparent and accountable. But do we do it, or do we depend on an external force to drive that regulation? So those are the questions we're going to debate. And for that, I have three very strong panelists. Kris Gopalakrishnan, chairman of Axilor Ventures, who's one of the co-founders of Infosys. He's on the board of Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology and IIIT Bangalore. Ajit Mohan, who is Vice President and Managing Director of Facebook in India. And before that, he was the Chief Executive Officer at Hotstar. And Roopa Kudva, MD of Omidyar Network, and she's the ex-CEO of Kris. She also serves on the board of IIM Ahmedabad, Nestle India, and Tata AIA Life Insurance. What I'd like to do is have each of them give their opening remarks so that they set the context for our discussion to then follow. So may I start with Kris?
Thank you, Rekha, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, NASSCOM, for having me in this very important panel discussion. As Rekha already mentioned, during the pandemic, the use and dependence on digital technologies have accelerated. What could have taken maybe 5 years got done in 5 months in use of digital technologies. I believe that the trust in technology is more important than ever, especially for the disadvantaged sections of society. Digital divide has widened, and lots of people have not been able to work or earn a living because of lack of access. Technology itself is neither good nor bad. It's how we deploy technology, create products or services that matter. If the products and services benefit society, they're good. If they harm society, they're bad. Sometimes the unintended consequences from the use of technology have to be factored in. It's the responsibility of the producers of technology to eliminate or reduce harms from technology. They're responsible for educating the users on the proper use of technology and make the technology easy to use. Finally, Rekha already mentioned this. We need a framework for the ecosystem to look at how we increase trust in technology. I believe that this framework must include the following factors. Responsible, that is, balance between profits and public good. Second, ensuring that privacy and security are comprehensively addressed and addressed on an ongoing basis, because technology itself will change the concept of privacy and security. Third, transparency, accountability, governance. And all of these three factors are actually internal to the organization. And last but not the least is the regulation and the process for compliant redressal, which must be there within the ecosystem, typically provided by governments, because governments govern businesses. So that's my opening remarks, Rekha.
Thank you, Kris. With that, may I move to you, Ajit, for your opening remarks?
Thank you, Rekha, and thank you, Kris. And I must confess, I'm largely aligned with all of what Kris mentioned. I would call out 4 things, Rekha, just to build on it. One is, I do think it's important while we're talking about technology, in many ways, the context of the conversation is the internet. And that's reasonably young, maybe 20 years. And a lot of the early stage of innovation in the internet was characterized by not enough rules or not enough traffic lights. And we saw explosive innovation. We saw a lot of good come out of it. But I think the last few years, we have essentially become more conscious that we now need to create a framework for the future, I think, as Kris mentioned. But it's important to recognize that we are now starting that conversation on what the new rules of the internet should be. And like in many other sectors, invariably that early stage of explosion and innovation has been accompanied by the absence of rules. And we are coming to the end of that phase of innovation. I think the second one is, I think it's so important to recognize that the canvas of opportunity unleashed by technology to improve people's lives, especially in India, is massive. And you know, if I look at the last 10 years that I've worked in India, and Kris and Roopa have done this for a lot longer here, every time you see a hockey stick and you see a year from then, you realize that, oh, well, that was just the beginning of a small curve. The hockey stick keeps getting larger. And in India, when so many people have come online in the last 5-6 years, And to Kris' point, we still have a lot to do to bridge the digital divide. I think it's important to solve for the future, is my second point. That we recognize that technology can unleash the ability to transform lives in a very short period of time. So we solve for the future. The third one for me, Rekha, is I do think there are two parts to the discussion about trust. Trust of the people at large, the masses, and the trust of the elite. I think a lot of the conversation in the last few years has been very focused on the trust of the elite. And I think both are important, by the way. Both are important stakeholders. But I think the real question is, while the trust of the elite is important, how do we make sure that we're actually building frameworks that solve for building trust for people at large? And the last one for me is, at least in the context of the internet, and again, recognizing technology is not just the internet, I do think it'll be helpful if we develop global frameworks. The very fact that the internet means that you're connecting people from around the world means that as we think about the governance framework, and to Kris's point, the role of governments and regulation, which I think is important, it'll be helpful if India takes the leadership role, but really solving for the world. Back to you, Rekha.
Thank you, Ajit. All right, to you, Roopa, now, for your opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Rekha. And I think Kris and Ajit have really set the stage beautifully. So I'll just develop on some of the things that they touched upon. So I think we all agree that today our digital lives are as important, if not more important, than our quote-unquote real lives. And trust really is the backbone of the digital economy. When individuals trust the internet, they will participate more freely. And I wanted to highlight three key dimensions in fostering trust, building on some of the points made earlier. Number one, building trust to enable India's next 500 million. That's the 500 million people who come from the bottom 60% of India's income distribution and using the internet for the first time, enabling them to benefit from the internet to improve their lives. For this, we need to reimagine the internet to make it more contextual, more relatable for this next 500 million, so that they build the trust and confidence. Some related aspects include getting more women to participate online, for example. It is also very crucial to protect this segment of the population from fraud and loss of data, because such incidents can materially set them back and undo any progress that they might have made in their digital journey. And then getting them back online requires disproportionate efforts. So building trust amongst the next 500 million needs to be a priority. Tech-led models can play a vital role in improving their lives by providing them access to basic services like healthcare, education, financial services, job platforms, and the like. And also, we are seeing, thankfully, hundreds of innovative entrepreneurs coming up today who are focusing on this segment and addressing the issues that they face through innovations in both the product design as well as the business model design. The second aspect is going beyond just the next 500 million, but going to the wider population, the broader population, perhaps including the elite that Ajit referred to, around the broader concerns around excessive data collection, privacy, and data security. I think it is time for businesses to look at privacy and data security as an issue going beyond compliance, but actually using it as a differentiator and a competitive advantage. And as far as responsible data sharing is concerned, the onus has to shift from an over-reliance on the use of informed consent by users to quality assurance by the providers. And the third and final aspect of building trust that I would like to highlight is the whole gamut of issues relating to misinformation and disinformation that have very much been the topic of much debate and discussion over the last 18 months. These are issues that need to be tackled for the people at large to build trust in the internet. With that, back to you, Rekha. I'm happy to dive in greater detail.
Thank you. This has given me so many nuggets that we could have a 2-hour conversation on this. But since we're short of time, I'm just going to throw some questions at you, and then I would please if you could keep your responses short so we can keep moving. I want to start with Kris and Roopa, both of you, because you both spoke to a similar topic about the digital divide, right? Kris, you spoke about the digital divide, and Roopa, you spoke about the bottom 60% of India's population, and making sure benefits reach them. So I have a common question to you, and then Kris, if you could answer, and Roopa, you could add on in a different way. One, how do we make sure that technology doesn't actually expand the digital divide, Kris? And Roopa, how does entrepreneurs, you spoke about entrepreneurs, right? And businesses, how do they balance profit and purpose, right? Because they have to make profitable growth. They have to have profitable growth, yet there has to be social outcomes, and it has to be done in a, as you said, in a transparent manner, explainable technology manner with no fraud. So how do you merge profit and purpose? Kris?
Yeah, so in order to address the digital divide, it is important to make sure that just as in the industrial era, we talked about access by creating road networks, train networks, access to airports, travel, etc. Here we have to look at access to internet and a digital device at every home. Now, this is something that government typically works on putting up the access to internet through maybe fiber optic cables to the village level, and there are technologies that are emerging now for the last mile. We need to probably take leadership in 5G, and I would go as far ahead to think about United Nations coming up with internet as a basic right for all individuals. On the personal device at every home, I believe that we have to think about innovative ways, and I have always talked about each one give one. So everyone who can must give a device to somebody who does not have one. So we need to have a mass movement to make sure that every home has a digital device. And we also need to look at, when we talk about education now, it is also important to talk about digital literacy. There has been a lot of programs now in digital literacy. Now we need to think about the older population. People are living longer, and they need now digital access more than ever. So we need to think about digital literacy across the population.
Okay. So Kris spoke about how do we expand, how do we ensure that people have access to the net? How do we ensure that they have the digital? But Roopa, I want to ask you, why will entrepreneurs focus on this segment? And how do they balance the two, as we said, purpose and profit?
I think things have seen a dramatic change in the last 5 years in India, and particularly I think post-COVID, as Kris said, several of the trends that were anyway going to happen as far as digital adoption is concerned are being significantly accelerated. So in the last 5 years, we have seen the fact that early stage investors are investing in businesses that go beyond addressing the needs of the people in the top 400 million of India's income distribution. We are seeing businesses which are going, even mainstream venture capital funds, investing in businesses that are addressing the mass market. I think the secret to building large, valuable businesses which serve customers who are not at the top of the pyramid lies in, one, building into the design of your business model, building into the design of your product features that help accelerate the digital journey of the next 500 million. So, for example, simple things like use of Indian languages, simple things like keeping in mind their social cultural context while designing products and services, assisted transactions, push versus pull services. So several smaller tweaks to both the design of the product and the service as well as the business model. And we have numerous such examples in India today. Companies like Bounce, for example, which is twin sharing, bike rentals. In a city like Bangalore, on a twin sharing basis, the cost per customer, per rider is less than what it takes in a Bangalore public transport bus, for example. So it is possible. We have companies like Vedantu, companies like Doubtnut, who have significantly brought down the cost of education, out of school education for aspirants for the competitive examinations or for the class 10 and 12 examinations, for example. So I think there are enough examples to show today that that is possible, and I think that's going to get a bigger and bigger movement going on. And very quickly on, as far as what Ajit referred to, people more at the top of the pyramid, the higher paying customers, for example, there I think businesses have an opportunity to use privacy, trust, data protection as a source of differentiation and competitive advantage. Indeed, globally, we are seeing companies doing that. And it's only a matter of time before I believe that that will begin to happen in India also. We recently conducted a small experiment through CSBC at Ashoka University, and we found that customers are more willing to share data when they understand privacy policies better, and they are more willing to share data with companies which have a higher quote-unquote privacy rating as created under test conditions. So I think there is a lot that can be done in terms of affordable business models, using some of the features that build trust, as also catering to high value customers by using trust as a competitive differentiator.
Okay, so what I got was one, if we build trust by making technology more democratic and providing services across all, and yet there are business models even in that. And second, that at the higher end, the consumers will want to engage if they trust technology, both. So with that, I want to go to you, Ajit. You spoke about a framework, right? But technology is developing so rapidly, and as are user expectations. So which are the main areas that we should be focusing on as organizations? Where should the focus be? What interventions, what frameworks, what guardrails are needed? Because the pace of change is so fast that it's old before you set a new guardrail in, or it's old before you set a new framework in. So your comments on that, since you spoke about a global framework.
Yeah, absolutely, Rekha, and you're right. And you don't want to have a framework that stifles innovation, especially at this early stage. I have 3 points here, Rekha. One, when we look at trust, I do think trust itself has 4 elements. There's a bunch of things related to, data and how you engage with the user who's engaging with technology. Second is, are you able to build associations of trust, right? You are making a distinction between the internet world and the real world, but the reality increasingly is a lot of our human associations are actually formed on the internet. So are you able to enable the process of building associations of trust, because that's been central to humanity for thousands of years. Third is, increasingly a lot of it is about the information that you see. Can I trust the information, right? Am I getting the right information or not? And largely, the fourth one is, are you fundamentally doing what is good for society more broadly? So I do think each element comes with its own set of actions that we can take both as individual companies as well as the community at large. I would say the second point is a lot of what the focus I think that the private sector can do is, how do you essentially give users control, more control over their interactions, their connectedness to technology and the internet, as well as transparency. I think Roopa mentioned it. The more companies are transparent about what exactly are they doing, what is their framework, I think more it enables companies to build trust, but also the ecosystem to build trust. And the third one is, I do think, Rekha, there is governments have a role to play in regulation. One of the things that's been very clear from the last 15 or 20 years is that there are many issues on which the trade-offs are so complex, you don't want an individual company or a set of companies to be taking choices. It is for the society at large, represented by government regulation, to say, when we have a trade-off between, let's say, free expression and safety, here is the framework. And for me, while companies have individual accountability on all those four elements of trust that I mentioned, and if anything, over time, we should veer towards more user control and more user transparency, there will still be a fairly hard set of choices where the trade-offs are so complex, regulation can only benefit it. And to the extent that democracies around the world are talking to each other so that it's a global framework of regulation that applies for democratic societies like ours, the easier it is for us to unleash innovation. To the question that you had, Rekha.
So interesting point that you made. So we have to make sure that we continue to unleash innovation. We have to make sure that there's a broad agreement on a framework. But I therefore then want to ask a question, and maybe Kris, you could answer that, and then anybody else, please jump in. You said that we need at a global level a collaboration and a broad framework and regulation, right? What should that be? What should the framework, what are the broad principles on that framework? Question one. And the second one, anybody please feel free to jump in after that, is do we really expect, with the pace of change that's happening, any regulation by any government to actually keep pace with our industry, because it's changing so fast? But that's the second conundrum. For the first one, what should the framework have? Kris, maybe start with you, and then please, Roopa, Ajit, add in.
So we don't have today global regulatory agencies. All regulations are typically at national level, and we have agreements at the international level in terms of trade, which have been created over the last 30, 40 years. And we are now starting to create digital data agreements between countries on how, where data should reside, how data flows across geographical boundaries should be controlled. We don't still have agreements on taxation, because the service can emanate from one country, but the service is delivered in another country. So where is the taxation incident happening? So these are things that we need to work out through mutual agreements. And I believe that as industry, what we need to do is we need to create standards, just like accounting standards and things like that, which industry comes together and creates, because we don't have global regulatory agencies. And at the national level, these are implemented, and companies are actually audited to adherence to these standards. So that's the framework that I see for us to come up with. Your question about innovation being ahead of regulation is true always, right? Whenever new technology is introduced, we don't understand the implications, and this will be a issue forever, and we will not be able to solve that. So what we need to have is sandboxes in which these technologies can be tested, piloted. We can understand the consequences in small groups and then probably roll it out. But this is where I believe that in the future, regulatory bodies must include industry representation and must be able to respond fast enough. If we identify a problem, we should be able to respond fast enough to fix that change. A evolving regulatory framework, which I believe are difficult for governments, but with technology implementation of these regulations, it may be feasible. But we have to make an endeavor to do that, because that's the only way I believe we can keep up with this.
Roopa, and then Ajit, if I may have your comments on this framework, because what is the role of the organizations themselves? I mean, so framework, fine. What is the role of the organizations themselves that have to do in terms of making sure that they're doing responsible by design as they build out whatever products and services that they do? If you could comment on that area, because I'm being told that we have last 2 or 3 minutes left. Okay, Roopa, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
I think as far as the framework itself is concerned, it will evolve. I think a lot of it will evolve. I think as long as we recognize we are learning, there are already global precedents as far as data protection frameworks are concerned in Europe, for example, and it will be an evolutionary journey. One area where I think regulatory bodies can help to guide consumers is, for example, coming up with some kind of certifications or gradings or standards, as Kris said. For example, the food regulation has very good safety certifications today. Similarly, electricity regulation has electricity efficiency guidelines. If we replicate something like that for privacy, then some rule of thumb will be available that can help customers cut through the jargon and trust businesses more. I think that's one step that can immediately be thought about, at least in the Indian context.
Ajit?
Three things, Rekha, I would add to what Kris and Roopa mentioned. One,
Ajit, you're not very clear suddenly.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, better.
Three things, Rekha. One, I do think there's a lot of incentives now for companies to do the right thing. Not just competition, but also even Rekha's point of, if you look at the objective of expanding access to women, the answer does lead to building tools of trust and privacy. So that's one thing to highlight. Second is, I think to the point that you asked, you're absolutely right. I think the pace of innovation, if anything, it's increasing. You don't want to stifle it. You don't want to hold back. And at least for me, the answer lies in, can you look enough into the past and come with enough specific things where trade-offs are already clear, while leaving the canvas open for things that are not yet clear. And the last point for me is to the Kris point about involving companies and the industry broadly. I agree. And for me, if all of us can align on objectives, even around national objectives like building tech capacity in India, but enable the canvas of these solutions to be open-ended, where there is enough opportunity to debate and think about ideas, but align on the objectives. I do think these three for me can enable us to nudge towards rules and regulation without stifling innovation.
Thank you. This has been very interesting, and I wish I had more time. But in this, I think what we covered very clearly is one, collectively, this industry has to work towards social impact. That will build trust. Second, that there has to be a framework, both externally driven but with industry involvement, both at the national level, but also at the global level. Third, that whatever that framework does, we cannot stifle innovation. Whatever we do, we have to make sure that it doesn't stifle innovation. And fourth, that ultimately, finally, each of our organizations are ultimately accountable for building trust in technology. I hope I captured that right. These are very interesting nuggets we got out of you, and which gives us lots of food for thought. With that, thank you so much for all your time. Thank you, Kris. Thank you, Ajit. Thank you, Roopa.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Rekha, Kris, Ajit, and Roopa. And that was a stellar conversation on trust. It looked at the entire framework and ambit. It spoke about so many aspects of social impact, of accountability, about what it is that we can do as an industry to ensure that the trust deficit is actually taken care of. In the end, we need to be able to trust and believe in each other and, of course, the larger good. Like what Sarah Connor mentioned at the end of Terminator 2, the unknown future rolls towards us. I face it for the first time with a sense of hope, because if a machine, a Terminator, can learn the value of human life, maybe we can too.